Greetings, Brookings Bio students. This is Mrs. Rydell. In our last few videos, we've been looking at some of the things that humans have been doing on our planet to impact biodiversity. And in this part of our slideshow, the last little section in Chapter 6, we're going to kind of zoom in on what are some of the most serious issues that we need to focus on in the future, and where are we going to go from here. So we're going to make a little list. Number 1, dead zones. Number 2, ozone depletion. Number 3, acid rain. Number 4, global climate change. And number 5, waste, as in garbage. So let's zoom in on look a little bit at each of these topics and see what's going on, and then see where we're going from here. Remember, in an earlier slideshow, we looked at the idea of what happens in an ecosystem if we have unlimited nutrients. Remember, limiting factors, if there's not enough food, keeps the population in check, controls how many organisms can live in that place. And if we have an unlimited supply of food, like in the summertime, in spring, when a lot of runoff from farm chemicals and manure runs into our lakes and streams and ponds, we get this these algal blooms that happen in our lakes. It's the reason that a lot of our lakes go green in South Dakota in the summertime. It's because we are adding unlimited supply of food for those organisms. So think about this on a bigger scale now, because this doesn't just happen in South Dakota. Here's a map of the United States, and take a look at kind of this mid area here with central states. This is, remember, this is where we're growing the majority of crops for the world. We have Iowa here, South Dakota, Nebraska, Kansas. This is where a lot of the farming takes place. And remember, if you're running off into streams, we have the Missouri and South Dakota, where all of this runoff is going to end up is in the Mississippi River, and it's going to end up being dumped down here at the bottom, down by New Orleans in the Gulf of Mexico. So think about what happens if we put a little bit of fertilizer from 1 or 2 farms in a lake, and what's going to happen if we put a huge amount of fertilizer and manure and runoff in the Gulf. So remember, what's going on here is that we're adding nutrients to the lake, causes the plants to flourish, the algae go crazy, we get these algal blooms floating on our surface. And those algal blooms prevent sunlight from getting down to the plants and the organisms at the bottom. And that, if we're not doing photosynthesis, remember, we're not making oxygen. It depletes the oxygen in the pond and causes organisms to die, and then those decomposers take over to break down the dead stuff and kind of chokes off, uses more of the oxygen, and basically what we're doing is depleting the oxygen out of our lake. And if there's no oxygen down here, we don't have living things, we don't have life, we don't have animals, we don't have plants. There's no oxygen to do respiration, causes the death of those organisms down below. So think about if we dump all of that fertilizer, all of those chemicals down into our Gulf, and what's going to happen there? Same thing, only on a huge scale. And what happens is we're creating these dead zones, and it's not just in the United States where the Mississippi dumps. Any country around the world, any place where you have rivers dumping into large bodies of water like the oceans, we're creating these dead zones. They start forming in the spring. That's when all the runoff is happening, when the spring rains come, and they grow bigger throughout the summer, peak usually in July, just like around here in July and August, and that's what the lakes look like. And you can actually see this from outer space. You can see this in a satellite, these areas where the algae take off and then cover the places below, and we're making these places lifeless zones where no life can exist. We're killing off the plants and animal species underneath the surface there. And we're talking large areas. This is like 5,000 to 8,000 square miles, almost an area almost the size of the state of New Jersey. These are huge, and they impact seriously the organisms that live there. So how do we fix this? How do we help? Remember, we talked about using modern technology, GPS and satellites, so we don't have to put down so much chemical. Using green farming practices, how we plow and how we do the no-till, so we don't have so much runoff of our soil, and stopping the erosion, because if the soil goes with the water into the stream, whatever's in the soil is going to. We have to figure out ways to do farming that use less fertilizer, and ways that we can stop the runoff of agricultural waste into our ecosystems. Number 2 on the list was something called ozone. And ozone is a natural gas that's in our atmosphere. Up in the atmosphere, up between 20 and 50 kilometers above the Earth, there is a layer in the atmosphere that has very high concentrations of a gas called ozone. Notice this is O3 now. Remember, oxygen, normal oxygen gas is 2 oxygen atoms buddied together, O2. This is O3. It's a different form now of oxygen, and it has 3 oxygens hooked together. And that layer where we have a lot of ozone concentrated is actually a protective layer that prevents too much ultraviolet radiation from getting through from the sun. Remember, UV light is coming, it's one of those wavelengths. In addition to visible light, we have some wavelengths that we can't see, and ultraviolet is one of those. That's the wavelength that gives you a sunburn when you lay out in the sun. If you look at your sunscreen bottle, it'll say this is screening against UVA or UVB rays. Those rays can be harmful if they get through to our planet, and that ozone is protecting us and kind of screening some of those out so they don't get down to where we are. Some of the things that ultraviolet radiation does for us, remember we talked about the idea of radiation, some kinds of radiation causing cancer, like skin cancer if you're out in the sun too much, cause aging of your skin. All of these young people that are spending time in tanning booths now, trying to look tan and fit, it's causing damage to their skin. And when they get to be middle-aged, they're going to look like dried up California raisins. That it causes damage to the collagen in your skin and causes the wrinkles and the aging to happen. Causes cataracts and blindness. If you spend too much time out in the sun with not wearing sunglasses, can lead to cataracts. And it doesn't just affect animals, it affects plants too. It can reduce crop yield, disrupt food chains in the oceans. There's some serious things that happen because of receiving too much ultraviolet light. We're going to watch a quick little video here.
Most of these people are exposed to invisible health risks. Harmful ultraviolet rays that are the primary cause of skin cancer.
Skin cancer is the most common cancer of all cancers in the United States.
1 in 5 Americans will develop skin cancer.
You gotta wear hats and shirts. Reason being is I've actually had skin cancer. I've already had malignant melanoma. You want to see it?
1 person dies of melanoma, the most serious type of skin cancer, every hour. Man-made chemicals that damage the Earth's ozone, allowing even more ultraviolet radiation to strike us.
For some of your age, you have a little more freckling that I'd like to see. Are you wearing some protection on your nose?
UV rays are a danger not only to our skin, but also to our eyes. UV exposure can increase your risk of going blind, as it can cause cataracts and macular degeneration. Even if we take corrective action and save the ozone layer, we will still need protection against radiation.
The main things that we suggest are wearing a sunblock with an SPF 15 or higher, wearing protective clothing, and really using common sense and not going out of your way to get sun exposure. Walking across a parking lot at the market matters as much as sitting at the beach.
It's never too late to start protecting yourself from the sun.
Or too early. Schools around the country take advantage of the EPA's Sunwise program that teaches children about sun safety.
There's cancers that we get as adults started children?
I put my wrist on and put my hat on and put me come out and I just like sit under snow and that's fun.
It's impossible to avoid all the UV rays that surround us, but sunrise habits can help ensure that we'll always be able to enjoy the modern sunny day. For the Weather Channel, I'm Dick Walker.
Scientists have been monitoring the ozone layer, looking at the atmosphere, looking back at the Earth for a very long time, since those satellites have been up like in the early 70s. And what we have been seeing, what they started to see, was the depletion in the ozone. We talked about it being an ozone hole, but it's not an actual hole up there. What it is that layer is losing some of the ozone gas that's there. So it's getting thinner and thinner and thinner. And changes throughout the year at different times, and it kind of moves around in different places. If you look at that, where it seems to be kind of centered at the beginning, it was over Antarctica.
If we had a glimpse into the year 2050, what would we see? Will aquatic environments be stable? Will crops still flourish? Will the sun's ultraviolet rays be more intense? The answers will be dependent upon the recovery of the world's depleted ozone layer, and whether or not it continues to shield the Earth from the sun's dangerous ultraviolet radiation. In the 1970s, Nobel laureate Dr. F. Sherwood Rowland discovered that the main culprits of ozone depletion were chlorofluorocarbons, or CFC, found in aerosol sprays and coolants.
I spoke up publicly about it in June of 1974. There was a lot of resistance from the industry at that time. When the Antarctic ozone hole was identified in 1985, then the resistance fell away rather rapidly.
Since 1987, nearly 200 world leaders have joined the United States to address the very real danger of ozone depletion by ratifying a treaty called the Montreal Protocol, which bans the use of ozone-depleting chemicals. Beyond harmful chlorofluorocarbons, other ozone-depleting substances exist within our stratosphere.
The Montreal Protocol also covers some compounds which contain bromine. These include halons, which are used for fire prevention, and then some others like methyl bromide, which are widely used as insecticides and pesticides.
The Environmental Protection Agency enforces the Montreal Protocol and supports scientists in the development of safe chemical alternatives. The situation is serious. The progress is being made. One example is the recycling of the refrigeration chemical Freon.
We sent it off to a Freon recycling company because it's no longer manufacturable, according to the Montreal Protocol.
It's only by sustaining the progress that we can ensure that our protective ozone layer heals by the year 2050. For the Weather Channel.
So if you look at what was happening to our ozone was being depleted in this layer above the planet, and it seemed to appear at different times, bigger and decrease at other times. Not an actual hole, but it's just that layer is getting thinner and thinner. And in the worst years, we were seeing like a depletion of 60% of the ozone that was there. And if the ozone disappears, then more and more of those ultraviolet rays are getting through down to the surface of the planet. What we have seen, an increase in the areas where that ozone depletion is happening. It's happening over North America, in Europe, Asia, Africa, all around the world. There's lots of places where that ozone level in that layer is decreasing, and it kind of depends on the season, but any decrease in that ozone layer is going to let more ultraviolet through, and we talked about some of those serious problems caused by too much ultraviolet light. So what we figured out, scientists go to work to see what's going on, why is the ozone disappearing, and what they discovered was there are chemicals called chlorofluorocarbons. They have chlorine and fluorine and carbon in them, and we call them CFCs for short, chlorofluorocarbons. And they were being released into the atmosphere from some of the places where we were using them. We found them in aerosol spray cans, spray paint, hairspray, air conditioners, coolant kinds of things, backs of the refrigerators. That tube that runs through the back of your refrigerator contains a gas that is providing the refrigeration when it expands and contracts. Fire extinguishers, there were a lot of chemicals that we were using in various places that were getting released into the atmosphere and destroying the ozone. So we said, what are we going to do about this? This is a serious problem. And so in 1987, there was a big meeting. Nations from around the world, including the United States, sent representatives to a meeting in Canada, in Montreal, and that's why the document that they signed is named for that city and is called the Montreal Protocol. And the countries got together and said, this is a serious problem, we need to figure out what to do. And they signed an agreement that everyone said, okay, this is causing the problem. These CFCs and the other ozone depleting chemicals we're releasing, we're going to cut back on doing that. We're going to stop releasing these chemicals into our environment. And CFC production was banned after 1995 in the developed countries and slowly over time in other countries. Today, more than 180 countries have ratified that treaty. Said we're not going to do this anymore. We're going to stop releasing these chemicals into the environment. And that's why now spray cans, if you buy a can that is a spray can, spray paint or hairspray, they no longer contain those CFC chemicals that were used to push the whatever it was in the can out there, used as propellant. So if you were spraying paint, the gas that was in there to push the paint out was a CFC, and now it's no longer a CFC. We use other gases. The gases that we use that are ozone depleting, we try really hard not to let them out into the atmosphere. Air conditioner, refrigerators, we collect those gases. If you're going to throw away your old refrigerator, if you get your air conditioner fixed at the car repair place, those chemicals are collected so they're not released into the atmosphere. We have recycling centers where those are collected and prevented from damaging the ozone. Here's the thing. We can't actually make ozone to replace the ozone that has been destroyed, but remember those cycles. The planet does. The planet can come back. And since we have stopped releasing those ozone depleting chemicals into the atmosphere, our ozone layer is coming back. And that's a good thing. The scientists are saying within your lifetime, our ozone levels should be back to what they were. This is an amazing thing. If you think about the way things are in politics and around the world in governments, it's not very often that different countries can get together, recognize a problem, say, okay, we agree, this is what's the problem, and here's what we're going to do to fix it, and everybody signs on to it, and they actually do what they said they're going to do, and see a positive effect. We are fixing this, we are helping this. And we need to use this as an example of how we are going to face some of these other problems that we have going on in the future. We have to recognize the problem. We have to get together as a world. All the countries have to get together and agree that this is what we're going to do, and then we need to do it. And if that happens, we can see a positive effect. We can see some of these problems becoming fixed. Okay. Number 3 is something called acid rain. Acid rain is caused from burning fossil fuels. It's the only thing that causes acid rain. When we burn fossil fuels, not only does it put carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, but there are other chemicals that burn in the gasoline, in the coal, in the oil, in the natural gas that are released into the atmosphere. They contain nitrogen, sulfur, and when those chemicals react with rainwater, it causes the rain to become more acidic. Remember we talked about the idea of acids and hydrogen ions causing things to become more acidic. When these chemicals react with rain, it makes the rain more acid. And if it falls into the environment, when the rain happens, precipitation happens. Remember, that's part of the water cycle. Those acidic molecules in the rainwater can cause damage to trees. It can harm streams and the animals that live there, causes breathing problems for people. Those molecules in the atmosphere is part of air pollution. It can damage statues and buildings. Acid remember, takes the calcium out of things. We did that little egg experiment back in our transport chapter where we soaked eggs in vinegar, which is a weak acid, and it removes the calcium from the shells. It can wear away statues and buildings. Serious, serious problems, damaging the ecosystem, damaging buildings, killing fish, other wildlife, disrupting food chains. It reduces the biodiversity, and it causes human problems for humans, and respiratory problems, bronchitis, and other kinds of things. So how do we fix this? We need to come up with another way to get our energy, get our electricity, run our cars. Burning fossil fuels causes damage to ecosystems. We need to stop using as much fossil fuel. Conserving electricity, remember the majority of our electricity comes from burning fossil fuels, so if we can conserve electricity, drive our cars less, and then work on some of those things to help our places where we are using fossil fuels. Alternative fuels on cars, we talked about increasing efficiency for like air pollution standards, and recycling. When you start over from scratch and have to dig aluminum, dig resources out of the ground and process them and make things, it uses a lot of energy. If you can start with something that's already made, like an aluminum can, and go from a recycled can back into something aluminum, it uses way less energy, and we need to recycle more. We are going to stop right there and come back to some of our other problems in our next part of our slideshow. Thanks for watching.